We found a clearing where no sound existed, not even our own voices. It had begun innocuously, the way all terrible things do. The forest had grown denser as we pushed inland. A knot of trees so old their branches clawed at each other like arthritic fingers. The path beneath our boots was soft with fallen needles, the earthy scent thick and almost cloying. Fog clung to the ground, a low-lying mist that slithered through roots and ferns like a living thing, curling around our ankles and whispering of damp decay. I remember the last normal sound we heard. A raven cawing somewhere above, a jarring note that seemed suddenly intrusive against the forest's quietude. And then it was gone. No birdsong, no wind in the pines, no creak of branches settling. Even our own conversation fell into muted hesitation. The words strangled mid-air as if the forest itself swallowed them. First, we laughed nervously. "It's just the fog," one of them said, Mark, always the rational one. But his voice felt fragile, trembling, as though sound had become a precarious thing. Even laughter seemed indecent here, and the longer we tried to speak, the heavier our throats became. Words coagulated, stalled in the mouth. Eventually, we stopped. The clearing appeared as a sudden rupture, a pale expanse ringed by trees whose shapes were wrong. Their trunks bent unnaturally, like bodies twisting in silent agony, bark ridged with knotted scars that seemed almost like faces frozen mid-scream. The fog thickened at the periphery, yet the center glimmered with an eerie translucence, the mist fading as though a vacuum had been drawn. Our boots sank into soft soil that smelled faintly of ozone and decay, and for a moment I thought I heard the faintest hum, a vibration beneath the soles of my feet. But when I looked at the others, their faces were blank, eyes wide with the same creeping dread. No sound. Not a whisper of the wind. Not the faint scrape of our own movement. Nothing. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, oppressive, aware. I could feel it pressing in from all sides, a living weight that seemed to measure the space between us. My heartbeat sounded deafeningly loud in my own skull. Yet when I opened my mouth to speak, no noise emerged. Mark's lips moved, forming words I could not hear. Sarah's hand brushed my arm, and I felt the pressure but no sound followed. Time too began to bend. Minutes stretched into an eternal present. We tried to move, but the clearing resisted, each step sinking into the soft earth as though it wanted us to stay. Shapes in the fog swirled at the edges of our vision, glimpses of forms that were not quite animal, not quite human, stretching and bending into impossible geometries. Shadows lengthened toward us, not cast by the trees, but emerging from the ground itself, writhing and pulsating like some buried, ancient thing. I realized, with a cold clarity, that the silence was not passive. It was a predator. It fed on vibration, on the tremor of our voices and the pulse of our thoughts. Memories came unbidden, fragmented by the pressure around us. The sound of my mother's laugh, the first words I ever spoke, the timbre of my own name. Each memory flickered, distant and ephemeral, vanishing as I reached for it, as though the clearing was devouring them. My identity began to feel porous, the outline of who I was dissolving in the absence of sound. Sarah crouched suddenly, her hands hovering above the soil as if she could feel something unseen moving beneath it. She tried to speak, but only a strange, rattling exhalation came from her throat. Her eyes darted toward the edge of the clearing, where the trees warped and twisted like the bones of some great, sleeping creature. A form emerged from the mist, a shimmer of impossible angles, limbs bending backwards in ways that defied reason. It made no noise, but the sense of attention was absolute. Every hair on my body stood on end, and I understood that it could hear me just by the presence of thought, could measure the echo of our intentions even in the absence of words. We were not alone. Not in the conventional sense. The clearing was a trap, a ritual space where entities older than the forest itself gathered, feeding on vibration, on the echo of consciousness. The air grew heavier, each breath a labor. I realized that the clearing did not want us to flee. It wanted us to dissolve, to become part of it. Our movements began to echo strangely, each gesture repeated a fraction too late, mirrored by phantom limbs beneath the fog. Sarah's reflection in the mist showed her not as she was, but as she would become, elongated, smudged at the edges, a body in slow dissolution. Mark tried to scream once, a raw, desperate sound, but it was swallowed before it left him, the silence taking not just the noise but the memory of having made it. I felt my own tongue stiffen, my vocal cords paralyzed, as if I had never been capable of sound at all. Panic clawed at my chest, but the clearing fed on it, absorbing our fear, twisting it into the fog that swirled around us. I stumbled forward, trying to escape the edges of the clearing, but the forest outside had changed too. The trees beyond the circle bent inward, a living funnel, pulling us back toward the center. I became aware of a rhythm beneath the ground, faint at first, then stronger, a pulsing, a heartbeat that was not mine. The entities moved with it, undulating in the mist, stretching impossibly, their limbs long and thin, absorbing every fragment of vibration we produced. The clearing was alive, and we were intruders in a mind older than memory. Hours, or what might have been hours, passed in timeless suspension. Cannot tell. The fog thickened, curling around my limbs, and the earth seemed to pull at me like a lover demanding intimacy. My own body began to distort in the reflection of the mist. Hands longer, eyes blackened at the edges, my mouth stretching silently as if trying to scream. My sense of self splintered, the memories of who I had been dissolving into the weightless air. I realized then that sound had been the boundary of my identity. Without it, the clearing could consume me entirely. Sarah's gaze met mine, her eyes wide and uncomprehending. She raised her hand, motioning as though to communicate, and I understood instantly. The clearing mimicked us, copied our movements to learn, to understand, to consume. She was no longer entirely herself. Neither was I. We were fragments, echoes, our names, our voices, our histories, all being rewritten by the absence around us. A wind stirred suddenly at the edge of the clearing, a soft ripple through the mist, but it carried no sound. Shapes coalesced into the semblance of mouths and faces, mouths that never moved, faces that never blinked, staring at us without eyes. The entities were not hungry in the way an animal is hungry. They were archivists, curators of vibration, archivists of existence itself. Every thought, every memory carried resonance. Here, resonance was sacrilege. Here it was life. I understood then the inevitability. To leave the clearing meant leaving fragments behind, leaving the echo of who we had been to be catalogued by something beyond comprehension. And yet, to stay meant being rewritten entirely, absorbed until our shapes were hollow, our histories silenced. There was no escape, only choice between partial memory and total dissolution. I tried to move, tried to break the ritual of the clearing with sheer will, but my body no longer obeyed. It was absorbed into the fog, the soil, the twisting geometry of the trees. I saw Mark fall, his scream invisible, and Sarah dissolve into the mist, her limbs bending like the trunks at the edge of the clearing. The clearing mirrored us, twisted us, and finally claimed us. I do not know if I am writing this now or if I am part of the clearing itself, a fragment attempting to remember the sound of a voice. The forest beyond has returned, normal in appearance, alive with wind and birdsong, but the memory of the clearing remains, a pulse beneath the world. I can feel it, always, waiting, stretching, hungry for the next sound. Even now, I can hear the echo of my own thoughts, faint and forbidden, and I know it is only a matter of time before the clearing finds me again. Because silence is not empty. Silence remembers. Silence waits. A figure made of branches followed us, matching our steps. I noticed it first as a pattern, not a presence. A symmetry in the woods that shouldn't have existed. Every time we stopped, something behind us seemed to stop as well. Not with sound, but with an uncanny correctness, as if the forest itself were keeping time. We had been hiking since late afternoon, pushing deeper than we planned. The trail dissolved into roots and leaf rot, then vanished entirely, replaced by a vague sense of direction that felt less like navigation and more like obedience. The trees grew closer together, trunks warped and leaning, their branches knitting overhead into a canopy that dimmed the light into a permanent dusk. Fog crept in low, curling around our calves, damp and cold, smelling faintly of iron and old rain. At some point, the forest went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Not the natural hush of distance, but a subtraction. No insects, no birds. Even our footsteps sounded muted, as though the ground were swallowing the noise before it could escape. That was when I turned around and saw the figure. It stood between the trees, half concealed, a vertical tangle of branches and vines loosely arranged into the suggestion of a body. Two thicker limbs hung at its sides. A knot of twisted wood sat where a head might be. It did not move when I looked at it. It simply existed, balanced in a way branches should not be. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of perspective. When I looked again, it was gone, or rather redistributed back into the forest, indistinguishable from the surrounding trees. I didn't say anything at first. Neither did the others. We walked on, our pace unconsciously quickening. The terrain shifted beneath our boots, the ground sloping and flattening without rhythm, roots rising like ribs through the soil. The fog thickened, beating on our jackets, soaking into fabric until everything felt heavier. Then we heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure, a cadence. The faintest scrape of wood on wood, perfectly synchronized with our steps. Left, right, pause, resume. I turned again. The figure was closer. This time, its shape was clearer. The branches had arranged themselves with intent. Elbows bent at the same angles as ours, legs jointed in the same wrong but functional way. When one of us shifted weight, so did it. When we hesitated, it hesitated. It's copying us, someone whispered, and even that felt like a mistake, as if sound itself were being recorded. We tried to outpace it. The forest resisted. Paths curved back on themselves. Trees seemed to rearrange when we weren't looking, trunks bending inward, closing gaps we could have sworn were open moments before. The fog blurred distance, making everything feel equidistant and near. Behind us, the figure improved. Its movements grew smoother, less jerky. Branches snapped and reknit with soft, fibrous sounds, rearranging into better approximations of knees and shoulders. Vines tightened into tendons. Bark peeled and shifted, creating planes that caught light like skin. It began to mimic more than our walk. When one of us limped slightly on a bad ankle, the figure adjusted, its wooden legs stiffening, compensating. When someone raised a hand to wipe fog from their face, the figure's upper branches lifted in the same motion, fingers of twigs flexing, experimenting with articulation. The realization settled slowly and horribly. It wasn't following us. It was rehearsing. The forest itself felt complicit. The silence pressed in, dense and observant. I had the overwhelming sense of being watched from every direction, not by eyes, but by systems, by roots communicating underground, by trees exchanging information through slow, ancient processes. We were not trespassers. We were inputs. Time began to misbehave. The light never changed, stuck in a perpetual gray that made it impossible to tell how long we'd been walking. My thoughts looped. Memories surfaced, then repeated, then returned slightly altered, as if something were practicing them. The figure grew a face. Not a real one, not at first. Just a hollow where a face should be, framed by bent twigs that suggested cheekbones. But it tilted its head when we did, paused when we paused. Its blank attention felt intimate, invasive. We stopped. So did it. We turned in place slowly. It mirrored us perfectly now, our reflections rendered in wood and leaf. I felt a crawling sensation beneath my skin, the certainty that something was being measured, mapped. The forest smelled stronger here. Sap, rot, wet bark. A ritual space, though nothing marked it but the feeling of recursion, of behavior folding back on itself. I understood then that the mimicry was the ritual. Walk, stop, turn, repeat, each cycle refining the copy. One of us screamed. The sound shattered unnaturally, breaking into fragments that seemed to hang in the air before being absorbed by the trees. The figure flinched, then opened its mouth, a jagged split in its wooden face, and produced something close to a voice. Not a scream. A distorted echo, strained and imperfect, like sound dragged through roots. We ran. The forest allowed it this time, but only barely. Branches lashed at us, snagging clothes and skin. The ground pitched and bucked. Behind us, the figure ran too. Its gait now almost human, its limbs bending with disturbing grace. As we ran, I felt myself thinning, thoughts slipping away mid-formation, the sense of me blurring, as if my identity were being externalized, rehearsed somewhere behind my eyes. I began to forget which of my movements were mine first. We stumbled into a clearing without edges. The fog pooled thickly, and the trees stood at a uniform distance, forming a perfect ring. The figure slowed, then stopped across from us. It was nearly complete. Its posture matched mine exactly. The angle of its shoulders, the tilt of its head. Where my jacket had torn, a strip of bark hung loose in the same place. Its face was still wrong, but closer now, indentations where eyes should be, a mouth shaped by repeated observation. I understood with a sudden, cold clarity what the forest wanted. Replacement, not death, continuation. The figure stepped forward. I stepped back. It corrected itself, stopping when I stopped, adjusting when I adjusted. A recursive loop, tightening. The forest hummed faintly, not with sound, but with approval. I felt the urge to move strangely, irrationally, to break the pattern, to become unpredictable. I twitched my hand, then another, moving in jerks and stutters, scrambling my own rhythm. The figure faltered. Branches cracked as it tried to keep up, its form destabilizing. The forest seemed to recoil, the fog shuddering. I ran again, not in a straight line, but erratically, changing pace, changing direction, thinking in fragments instead of sequences. Behind me, the scraping grew uneven. I don't know how long I ran. I don't know what I lost. When I finally broke free of the trees, the forest edge looked ordinary. Birds called. Wind moved through leaves. Sound returned, overwhelming and sharp. But sometimes, when I walk alone, I feel my steps echoing a fraction too late, and I wonder, quietly, terribly, whether the figure ever learned me well enough to walk out wearing my shape.